Is this go live? Yep, you're live.
Did it looks all right? We good?
Yep.
It worked. Oh boy! All right, got it set. All right, just gonna make. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Move some stuff around. This. And of course it does. Is it still on there? What did it just do?
Nothing, you're still.
It just went away from me. Hold on. I'm there. I want this.
Start saying hi to people.
Oh, hey, what's going on, guys?
There's Mike and Brian. Say hi to.
What's up, Mike? What's up, Brian? How's it going, guys? I'm getting stuff set up. Moving stuff around on my computers here. I'll be able to see there. There we go. That's what I want.
Tell them to drop any questions about mechanics.
All right, yeah. And so if you guys have any questions as I'm getting set up here, make sure you throw them in there. I've got a bunch of stuff we can go over here. I'm just about set up, organizing all this stuff. All right. There we go. I think I'm happy with that. It sounds like audio is good. All is check. All is recording. Okay, cool. Definitely appreciate you guys being here, whether you're watching now or happen to be taking a look at it later. Definitely for this kind of thing, Vanessa, you may have heard her in it a little bit back here behind the camera. I have no idea what I'm doing yet with this stuff, and she has been a massive help. So if you guys are looking for anything, content, photographer, videographer, brand management, website design, anything like that, definitely look out for her. What's that? That Girl Squats.
Yeah.
At That Girl Squats. That's her Instagram. So if you guys need anything like that, she's got you covered. Cool. So I've got a bunch of questions that people sent in through the question box that I put up on Instagram. So we'll go over that in a little bit. But really fast, for people who are not familiar with me, just real quick. I don't want to go into long detail. Sorry, I'm still fine tuning all my camera angles here. For people who are not familiar with me exactly, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I've been practicing about 10 years, and an IFBB Pro bodybuilder. So that's where a lot of my background comes in with a lot of this stuff. I've focused really heavily in my professional career on what we call outpatient orthopedics. So that's pretty much what most people know of as physical therapy. So muscles, joints, bones, nerves, all of the above. And you'll see how that factors into how I do everything with the idea of training, biomechanics with lifting, and all that kind of stuff. So that's the background I can give you guys. And I think as you hear me talk more and more, it'll spark some interesting thoughts you guys might have, or some questions that might pop up that you guys didn't know too much about. I'm going to spend a lot of time answering some questions because there are actually some not surprising at all, some really good ones that came in that elaborate on some things that I get asked all the time, that there are some misconceptions for, as far as how they work, how they go, and how to go about doing things. But really, first, I want to start you guys off with a story here. So this is a little interesting thing that you guys may not have thought you were going to get from me first here, but this opens up a. Oh, Lacey, what's up? Hey, thanks for joining. I'm trying to get good at keeping up with the everything that shows up on the chat here. But with the story here, and this story is actually going to be about fear. And the way I'll describe this is it's fear of movement, and this plays a lot into how we function as human beings. So this is a story about an individual I've gotten to know pretty well over the last several years. But essentially, he came to me with just chatting, getting to know him in the gym, with some chronic reoccurring lower back pain. Now, that probably sounds very familiar to a lot of people. This is 10 plus years this stuff's been going on. And he was chatting to me when he was having a flare up of his condition, that really takes him out of being able to play tennis, being able to lift, all the different stuff that he likes to do. and he's gone through all kinds of different medical treatment with it. Things get better and it flares up again. Things get better and it flares up again. And we had a little bit of light interaction with some other types of treatment. So he kind of knew my background and how I went about things. And so he started asking me about this. And so I started us off with telling you this story about fear. So this is where it gets kind of interesting in how we move as people, as human beings here. When he was talking to me about this, I had an immediate response for him. Could I give him hey, X is what's going on? Not necessarily, but I think we dwell way too much on trying to figure out that exact specific, rather than focus on what I call the clinical appearance of things are. So immediately I had a response for him. And my first question, I actually asked him a question first. I was like, why don't you just bend over? Like just bend forward like you're going to try and reach and touch your toes. And this is where, when I started the idea with the story of fear, this is where it sets in here. Immediately when I asked him that, it's like, when's the last time you did that? Hey, what's up? Thanks for joining there. How's it going, man? Immediately when I asked him that, you could see his eyes get really wide, and you can see he was kind of fearful of doing that, uncertain, unsure. And if you just think about that concept, that idea, we've been told over and over that when you bend, you hurt things. We're not supposed to bend. We're not supposed to lift. If we're training and we're working out, our back has to be perfectly straight and flat. And while there's a lot of scenarios where that is very useful, very helpful, and very much instructed, in everyday life, that's a negative. And that feeds into what we'll call, the term is a maladaptive behavior. And so it's a movement pattern we've accepted for a certain reason at first, because likely it was painful at first, but we've continued it. And that continuation of that movement pattern is actually what is now producing the symptoms on its own. So it's a maladaptive movement pattern. And so back to the story, when I asked him to do that and I saw his face, I immediately knew, because I'd known him for a little while, and I'd watched him move around, watched him train. And you can kind of, you can pick out how different people move. And that's a big part of what I do as far as how I work with people, train people, all that kind of stuff. It's about movement patterns. And so I pretty much immediately knew when he gave me that response, I was like, okay, we're on to something here. He's got some fear and some guarding of this movement pattern. And just think, if you hadn't moved something appropriately in maybe 10 plus years, it would probably be pretty uncomfortable to move it. It probably would tighten up. There'd be a lot of consequence with that. And so with that being said, when I was talking to him and I encouraged him for the first time and kind of talked him through how to do this safely and not to be worried about it, I wish I was making this up, honestly, with the way it went. I wish I was making up. But within a 10-minute conversation and a 2-minute instruction on just, hey, man, just bend forward, he came back to me the next day and said his back hadn't felt this good in like 15 years. And so it's just, I didn't do anything magical. I simply just gave him the ability to say, it's okay to do this. We're built to do this. More about the background of what is appropriate for us to do, how we are built, why we can move. And while not everybody would fall into that category, obviously I talked to him, I kind of looked at him and gotten his history, and I knew where he was going to fall on that spectrum. It's a, hey, what's going on? It's a good illustration of the fact that fear drives a lot of the movement patterns and the things that we do, uncertainty, and kind of just not knowing. And even a little bit more, I may be a little dramatic here and use the word a little more sinister, is improper information. And I think that's an unfortunate, excessively prevalent part of what goes on if we talk about, from this perspective, healthcare in general, but a lot of times also just general information. I was just watching, in fact, just watching a video last night on YouTube about a guy essentially breaking down financial information that he sees on TikTok and whether this was appropriate or not. And it was kind of hilarious because while I'm not an expert in that field, I've been paying a lot more attention to it. And it's really interesting to see how those, that information that's out there, you've really got to critically think and decide what's right for you and what's not right for you. So going back to this story, simply, I dispelled the fear and the myth that these things were not okay for this individual. And all of a sudden he started moving more appropriately. He broke that maladaptive behavior and now his body feels better. And in the year and a half, probably about, since we had that conversation, he has not once come to me again mentioning that he's had back pain. Now, has he? I don't know. I can't be for sure. I just know he's never brought it up to me, and we talk about a lot of stuff. So he usually brings stuff up to me like that. So I just thought that was a really interesting story for you guys to hear kind of at first on how we go about things, how we choose our movements, what we do in our everyday life. Because if we think about the training environment, which is likely where a lot of people have a background here. Hey, what's up, Jake? If we think about the training environment here, we function the same way oftentimes. We function potentially with a little bit of fear of what's okay, what's not okay. We take information for face value sometimes, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it's where I always encourage people to be critical thinkers with the information they've gathered. Always ask yourself why, because you're going to see as I go through and answer a lot of questions, one of the biggest things I always ask myself, or when any clients come to see me, one of the first things I ask myself is why. People come with outcomes. They come with, hey, I've got issue X, Y, whatever it is, I need to get better at training this. Or I can't feel this when I'm training, or I don't feel like this is going well. And in my head, the very first question I always ask myself is why. And it's my job to figure out why that's going on, because then if I can share that, then we can really get to the root of the problem that's occurring. And so you're going to see with a lot of questions that I get asked, the amount of times that you're going to hear a why come out of me is we're looking for that why behind the scenes. I know I had somebody else jump in here, and I know he knows that conversation because we were talking about his work not too long ago and why there was one thing over the other thing. And then as soon as we started having the conversation of why, it was like a light bulb that said, oh, this makes a lot of sense. So it's really interesting how this applies kind of across the board with what we do in the gym, out of the gym, just everyday life stuff. Thought that was an interesting story to share with you guys. Real quick, before I keep going on here, I want to let you guys know that I'm going to try and make this a much more regular thing. So every week. So as you go about this, if you think this is interesting, share it with people. You know, bring in the community. The larger the community we have, the more interaction we can have, the more questions I can answer. The way I kind of see myself is, here's another story for you. Sorry. Is I want to take all this information that we can find all over the place and kind of distill it down and give you my take on it from my professional experience and my experience training and all that outside of that as a bodybuilder. For shoot, I've been practicing physical therapy for about 10 years and I've been a bodybuilder now for over 15. So I've been doing this stuff a long time. And I tend to approach both sides of it with about the same passion. But kind of why I got onto this kick is I was actually, believe it or not, I was having my car serviced one day. And there was a younger guy who was talking to me and he was asking me a bunch of questions about training, nutrition, how to do this, how to do that. And typically with most people, my first response is, hey, there's so much information you can find out there. You can get on YouTube, start looking at videos. There's great stuff out there. Just about any bit of information you can actually find online. And it can be really good. But then he responded back to me, and this is kind of a light bulb moment for me. He responded back to me with like, yeah, I see all kinds of stuff. And I see stuff that says this and stuff that says the exact opposite. And he's like, what do I do with that? And all of a sudden I was like, holy cow, he's right. Like there is so much out there, a lot good, some not so good, and it becomes hard to find a collection of deciding what is the appropriate step to take for me. So that's where I am looking to hopefully help you guys distill information, and why I say, hey, let's make this a big community thing, because the more questions we get, the more we can sift through together. And one thing that I will tell you, you'll hear about me a lot, is rarely do I say things are wrong. That's a pretty definitive response and answer to things. And more often than not, there's too many variables to decide what's right or what's wrong when we talk about mechanics, training, rehab, injury prevention, all of this stuff. There's so many things that go into play here that oftentimes it's just what's right for you, not necessarily what's wrong. And finding the right for you is the key to it. And the only way we find that kind of stuff is questions. We ask questions, we critically think. And again, just going back, that's why I want share this stuff with people, guys, because the more people I get, the more people I can talk to. I want to start helping people understand what all this information they find actually means. If you've ever worked with me in person, so if anybody watches this ever worked with me in person, I think they'll see this right away. It's all about the education piece of it. The more we know on our own, the better we can do. The problem is we are not all experts at it, but I've spent greater part of a decade of my life trying to become such. And so I want to be here to help you guys navigate through all the information that's out there, the questions, the aches and pains, or whatever it is that you guys have going on. So again, if there are any specific questions that come up here, just drop it in the chat there. The more I can answer, like I said, the better here. But I want to touch back after that quick breather in my story here for a second. I want to go back to that story, and I want to tell you. All right, Jake, I appreciate it, Jake. I want to expand on that story about fear just a little bit with one other person on a very, very similar topic. And this one has a lot of direct, hey, what's going on? Thanks for joining. A direct relationship to our training environment. In fact, this happened to be an individual that I did actually work with him on some rehab initially, leading up to a show. And then afterwards, I continued training him, just healthy training to just continue to build and develop. And this individual has also had long-standing back issues and a history of a little stuff going on, nothing significant necessarily. But because of that, he had, again, another fear of doing any kind of lumbar spine or lower back loading. Because he knew he'd done it in the past. It caused a lot of pain, caused a lot of problems, limited him a lot. And so he decided he was better off just leaving that out. And honestly, I don't disagree with that statement. This is where I say variables matter, right? Because if we think about trying to train to develop our physique or to improve strength or to whatever it is, we cannot be limited by something other than what our target goal is. So if we're limited by back pain, we're not pushing to the level we need to push to actually develop to achieve our goals. And so really his decision in the moment was likely a pretty good one. But the problem is that decision, hey, what's going on? Thanks for joining, man. Likely his decision there became unnecessary because as this stuff has been going on for 5, 10, 15 years, we've got to understand that our bodies heal. We are, our bodies are, this is going to sound stupid, but it's a living organism that has to heal. If it doesn't heal, we don't survive. That's the bottom line. And now healing is a very interesting statement. So this is going to take me to a place here real quick. When we talk about healing, we mean health of tissue, right? I don't mean symptoms. Symptoms of things bring in a lot of other variables about people's lives. What pain is, that's a whole, shoot, we could have a whole 5-hour discussion on what that is, and there'd still be more left. But symptoms are the things that don't always just go away. Tissue heals, our bodies heal physiologically, but sometimes the symptoms don't go away. And so back to the story about this guy with the training. And so because he was at such a fear of loading his lower back, he just stopped doing it. And again, personally, in the short term, without us really diving into it, that's probably a good option. Like if you're injured and you can't keep training, then you're not going to accomplish your goals at all. And so working around that to be able to train effectively becomes incredibly important. The problem becomes is if you do that for 5 or 10 years, in my head, I'm going, why? Here's my first time I'm asking why. Why is it that this issue is occurring continuously for 5 or 10 years? That doesn't make sense if our bodies heal, right? And so as we were having a discussion, I simply encouraged him to say, hey, we've switched all this back training to take the lower back loading out of it, leg training to take the lower back loading out of it, and all this kind of stuff. What if we changed it? What if we decided we're going to add some in and we're going to find the right way to do it? And so sorry, my dog's down here just being crazy, chewing on something. I don't know if you guys can, he's a goofball. Anyways, what if we started slow with something he felt comfortable with and we built up? So and no credit to me on this at all. He's done all of this. I just simply said, hey man, it's okay. That's all the information I gave him. So again, we feed back into that initial story about fear. I just simply said, it's okay. You're not going to injure yourself. Does it mean things are going to feel great? We don't know, but we can figure that out. That's okay. And so I encouraged him to, if you're interested in deadlifting, because he was kind of like, man, I haven't deadlifted in forever. And I just feel like it's something my body needs and I like to do it. And so I just said, hey, why not do it? It is really the response I gave him. Hey, thanks for joining, guys. So the response I gave him was, why not do it? See what happens. See how you feel. It doesn't mean he puts 400 pounds in that bar and deadlifts it on the first rep. That's just not smart. And so instead I was like, dude, just put 100 pounds, whatever you feel comfortable with, just put it on there and do a deadlift and see how you feel. And in that session, I just gave him the advice of, as you feel better, slowly progress. Don't make any big jumps. Do what you feel comfortable with. When you feel uncomfortable doing it, back off. You're done. The next day, come back and do it again, right? And so he's done that over probably, that conversation was probably maybe a month ago, maybe a little bit more. And this guy that didn't even, and he even told me this actually fairly recently, like he couldn't even fathom just picking up a bar off the floor, is now deadlifting nearly 300 pounds for reps and feels good doing it. Now he's progressing up. So he notices once he gets to the end, when he's like, he feels a little uncomfortable, that's where he stops and backs off. And I'm like, that's perfect. And now he's using this movement as a rehab pattern. All right, I'm taking a look at this question real quick.
I can read it if you want.
All right, I'm going to let Vanessa read this question for me. That's the end of my story anyways. Jake, perfect timing.
I see a lot of younger people obsessed with workout splits. I think it would be beneficial to have someone like you explain why the split matters, but maybe nutrition matters more, question mark. It's analysis paralysis.
Oh, yeah. So all of the information out there. What is... this is going to trigger some people. It doesn't really trigger me. I get over this word. But what is optimal? Well, what I'm going to tell you first is what is optimal is what works best for you, that you enjoy the most, that gets your results, that you can stick with. That's the bottom line. Can you do it consistently? Can you do it with intensity? If the answer is yes, then we're on the right page, right? If you really hate doing something, there's a good chance the consistency and the intensity is going to be a little bit low. So as far as when you set up splits, so this is an interesting thing. There's really in my head no right way. You might be able to argue there are some ways where it makes you scratch your head. But when somebody gives me information, asks me questions, so if they've made some kind of split, before I even judge whether it's appropriate or not, I ask why. Again, here we are critically thinking. I told you this is going to come up a ton in how we decide what we're going to do. Why becomes the most important question. If you have set up a split for yourself and you get asked why you set it up and you can't answer that, take a step back. Whether if you have to seek out more information, seek out more information. whatever it is, try and figure out that why. Now, if your why is because I was told to, that's okay. Is that the why I would say is appropriate for it? No, but that's where you start. So there's nothing wrong with that. Because being told to do something doesn't necessarily mean that's a good why. It's kind of like I'm sure we've all heard our parents say at some point in life, if not you guys, well, I have. If everybody else was jumping off a bridge, would you do it too? Well, of course not. That's stupid, right? Yeah, but we've all gotten ourselves in a little bit of trouble, so we know about that a little bit. But this is the same thing. If somebody tells you to do something, just think why. You may decide that why is very good. So if I set up splits for somebody, this becomes very individualized a lot. If we talk, because we also have to think about goals. Goals become incredibly important. Because I know Jake, I'm just going to talk about this. We could have a huge conversation on this as well, but I'm going to go from his background, and I know he's coming from a bodybuilding background. So, hey, what's up, Huda? So I'm going to just sit on that piece of it, but just know the very first thing you ask yourself is, what is my goal? And then how do I set myself up best to achieve that goal? And so I'm going to go at this from like a physique development perspective, which isn't necessarily the same as a strength development setup. So let's keep that in mind too. So we're going to look more at a physique development setup. So one of the first things I consider is, are there specific areas that need improvement? Are there areas that don't need improvement and are really good for where we're at right now? Hey, what's up, Scott? That's my brother, by the way, guys. Say hi to him. Oh, my mom's on too. I didn't see her join. Sorry, Mom. You can always count on your mom to pay attention. What's up, Huda? So is asking, figuring out where the deficits are. So there's a good chance too that if you're early on in this, so let's talk about this like somebody who is early on in this process. There's a good chance that you could say, well, shoot, I need to improve everything. Okay, great. Believe it or not, that actually makes setting up the split even easier. And so the things, how you prioritize things is what becomes important. So whether you want to do a single body part split on a day, a push-pull legs, an upper, lower, honestly, they're all valid options. And what it comes down to is, sorry, my dog again. You can't hear him apparently, as he just like chokes on chewing on his toys down there. Is volume through a week. So we want to think about this in a week by week setup. And then we want to position things where we can try and get the most effort out of a trained body part as we can. Keeping in mind that if our goal is to prioritize everything, then by proxy, we are prioritizing nothing. Because if we say we're giving high value to everything, well, essentially we've given high value to nothing because everything sits at the same level. So we do need to decide, where do we want to prioritize? And we get to pick. If we need everything, it doesn't matter. Pick whatever you want to start with, because you're going to reevaluate that process as you go. Generally speaking, I like to have people think about things when it comes to training splits, progress, things like that, on about a 3-month basis. Anything shorter than that, I think you're selling yourself short on the learning curve and not giving yourself enough time to progress. Now, it doesn't mean you change things every 3 months, while we're on that topic, because I am a huge fan of, if it's working, you're seeing the progress you want, everything's going the way you want, don't change anything. Just keep doing it. Doesn't matter if it's 1 month, 6 months, 2 years, 10 years. If it's still working, don't change it. Because why would you risk that if you're already getting it? So don't get caught up in this idea that we need all of this different kind of stuff to achieve these goals. You just simply assess if you are achieving your goals, and if you are progressing, great. Don't change anything. Just keep working on it. Hey, what's up, Albert? So if we go back to setting up that split then, where I go, if I break it down first, I think about, where do they need to develop? Are there any lacking parts, anything like that? And then I think about their experience with it. How effective is somebody at really pushing the way they need to? And so what I mean is intensity when I come to that. And intensity isn't necessarily making all those crazy faces and being all loud in the gym. The intensity is the effort you exert. You can do it silently, you can do it loud. None of it bothers me, but it's how much effort you exert. Therefore, how well can your body recover? Because we want to then think about the recovery side of it. I know for myself personally, my legs take me a long time to recover. For years, I've tried to, hey, what's up, Steve? How's it going, man? I've tried to be able to train them like I would once a week. I've been trying to do it twice a week, and they never recover. I got injuries. It just didn't work out for me. And so that me setting something like that up wasn't going to work for me. Now, shoulders, arms, back, they all recover great. My chest takes a little bit longer to recover too. So I just keep those things in mind. And that's how I'm going to kind of choose what type of setup I do, whether it's an individual body part, the push-pull legs, a mix of it, because there's no right or wrong way. You don't just have to do one and not the other. But how you cue those things into working. And so without dragging this conversation out super, super long here, the next big piece that I think about is when you're going into training, as you plan on what recovery that you think your body is capable of, if you're going to pick between, and let's just use two of them here. Let's just use like a push-pull legs or like what a lot of people refer to as like the bro split, single body parts, multiple body parts. Hey, you too, Steve. Happy New Year, man. Is consider how much effort you really put into a lift. And what I mean by that is if we're doing a like a push-pull legs type setup split, then we're only going to have a few movements we do at each body part, right? And so theoretically, then in that one session, that's going to give us the ability to push harder with that movement. Because as we string it out, let's say we have 5 quad movements. Well, by the time you start to get to the end of it, you have diminishing strength, of course, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that's a negative, though, because really we tend to see that volume is the piece that matters, as long as the diminishing strength doesn't get so low where, if I were to do, generally speaking, if I were to do something fresh and I could do it for 30 reps, but then I go to do something when I'm tired, and that weight I'm using, I would be able to do it for 30 reps fresh, but I can only do it for 10 or 30 plus, really, because technically 30 is still in the range. But I would have been able to do it for 30 plus, but because I'm so tired, I'm only doing it for 10. In my head, that's a waste. That's a waste of energy, because now we haven't put enough. We've become so tired. The effort we can exert now is so minimal that we just don't need that anymore. And so a lot of people tend to shift a little bit towards push-pull legs because it helps kind of moderate some of that. And then you just split your volume up for the week over multiple days. So it's a great way to do it. You just have to keep in mind that when you're doing something like this, and this is a personal experience of mine, so this is an opinion when it comes to this, is you have to make sure when you go in to do your training, when you go in to do your set, you may only have 8 or 10 working sets on a body part, which for me is quite low a lot of times, and that's just how I've done it. You've got to put in that effort on those sets. They all matter. Whereas if you're doing a single body part, you may have 16 working sets. And so if there's a couple here or there that you're working on building to get into it really well, then that's okay. You'd like them all to be great, but you have to really try and make the time you're using count with it. It's really what I think about there. So as far as how to set that up, the biggest thing is, honestly, it doesn't matter.
But what would matter more, nutrition or training?
What would matter more, nutrition or training? That's not a fair question to ask, because they both matter excessively. So what I'll say about that is there's a statement out there that says you cannot outwork it's just like a cliche statement. You can't outwork a bad diet. Now, the first thing when I hear stuff like that is I think about the extremes. Okay. So I think about the extremes. I think about progress in different areas, and I think about different types of training. Let's real quick, and then I'll pull it back to a select piece because it's hard to think about everything all at once. But very clearly, a power lifter and a bodybuilder have very different physiques. They have very different goals in mind, and that's okay. That's great. They train very differently. They eat very differently. They are two very different athletes. And so these things matter in the outcome of the goal. So if we keep this more in a physique development type area, nutrition becomes incredibly important because one, you have to have the fuel to exert the energy you need. You have to be able to recover because you don't actually build anything in the gym. You break it down and you've got to let your body rebuild it. And so if you don't have the proper nutrition you need to recover from that, you're going to be significantly hindering yourself on that side of it. And so nutrition does have to be good. Now, honestly, we all, even from my background as a bodybuilder, I want to say you got to have perfect nutrition. It matters. Man, when you start talking about the top 1%, it does matter. It matters significantly. Honestly, for the average person, the general statement I give them if they ask me about nutrition is cook more food yourself and eat more than you think you're supposed to. And most people do great with that. That usually takes you out of the comfort zone you've fallen into because you've gotten into a comfort zone. And so this is now why you're asking these questions. And so as a general rule of thumb, it's not a perfect statement. That's a great way to think about it. But in order to maximize your training, you do need nutrition to support it. But that doesn't mean you can train like junk. Because if you don't put in work while training, you're still not going to get any output towards your goals because you're not putting enough stress on your body for it to say, hey, I need to make a change. The whole reason we train is essentially to stress our body as we stress our physiologic tissues. And this is an exact statement with rehab as well. This is exactly how we rehab different tissues that have injuries as well. As we stress tissues, it stimulates physiologically processes that help build them, right? As we stress them appropriately. Obviously, we can overstress them, we get injuries, things like that. But as we appropriately stress them, they're going to respond to meet that need. That's what the training is for. So if our training is way down here, but our performance level could be way up here, we're not stressing anything that matters, right? Our body's never going to adapt because it has no need to. It's got the capacity it needs already, right? Now, if we're training here, we're right at that level. It's going to go, oh, shoot, we're getting close to the limit. We need to adapt because we're not comfortable where we're at. And so now it's going to look to adapt to build. And so training has to be a high priority of intensity. And again, I don't mean making crazy noises. I mean effort. But it has to be supported by nutrition. So unfortunately, the answer to training and nutrition, which one's more important, there's no answer. You've got to do them both, right? There's no get out of jail free card. You can have one and not the other. But depending on what your goals are, where you're at, having this perfect diet is really not that important to most people. It's about just getting enough input to be able to produce the output and recover afterwards.
You kind of answered it earlier, but I'm still going to ask it. Earlier, you brought up training for strength versus physique development. What is the difference? Set structure, workout split, question mark?
Oh, that's it. So typically speaking, if we want to optimize one or the other, now we're talking extremes here, okay? So the extremes matter, but just know that most people fall in the middle. It's considering and knowing what the extremes are what it's going to help you find out where you fall on that continuum of the pattern. So keep in mind as we talk about this is going to be extremes, and very few people actually fall in the extremes. You could say high level competitive bodybuilders, people have been doing it for a very long time, fall likely close to one extreme. And then I would also say that high level, very experienced power lifters fall on one end of it. Now, notice I didn't say everybody that does it, because that's not true, because absolutely there's crossover between these things. But as you get more experienced and you get more, you practice it more, you have to start getting more specific towards your goals as you go. There's no time frame for that. It's more about how you are developing as an athlete with the things you want. So generally speaking, nutrition still matters across the board. You've got to eat enough to recover and build. It doesn't matter where you fall on that spectrum, you have to do it, right? And the nutrition, really, it doesn't have to be any different. It can be the exact same as long as you're eating enough, but you do have to consider the amount needed to eat to recover for certain individuals can become taxing in different ways. This is a whole nother conversation we could get into about a physiologic mechanism with gut health, digestion, all kinds of stuff like that. Let's put that aside for a second, and let's talk about the training piece of it. So if we go back, now I've given you this long background, because remember, why is the most important thing. There really aren't a lot of straightforward answers necessarily. It's the why, but let's break it down to as straightforward of an answer as we can get based on what we've seen through research. If you want to specifically improve strength, you tend to work in a lower rep scheme. You tend to work, now that, remember, this is the extreme side of it, in give or take, right? Not exact here, like 5, 8 or less reps, right? 8's kind of pushing it to the top end of what most people do if they're really, really trying to improve strength. So the rep scheme tends to be a little bit lower. If you're looking to build muscle size, so hypertrophy, so now we're talking about the bodybuilding side of it. Again, we're talking about the extreme. There's crossover between everything. The rep schemes tend to be a little bit higher. And what we've seen through research on that is optimal. Here we go again. Optimal. It is what it is, right? Don't think this is, but you're going to see why that word doesn't really mean a whole lot of times, is between 8 and 30 reps in a set. There is a huge window there to fall in. And so generally speaking, if we go as straightforward as you can with the answer to the question about powerlifting and bodybuilding, the training setup, powerlifters are going to work on a lower rep scheme. Bodybuilders are going to typically work on a higher rep scheme. That's about what that amounts to at a very basic level. There's a ton more that goes into how you plan things, what movements you choose, things like that, because we have very different goals between physique development and strength development. Now, like I said, most people are looking for both. And so what do? You just train with effort. You will get both. Just because you train in a low rep scheme does not mean you will not grow muscle size. And just because you train in a high rep scheme does not mean you will not get stronger. Both will happen.
I have a question. What's up? How do you navigate pain and injury versus pain and training for growth?
Okay, so navigating, Vanessa asked me a question, pain and injury versus pain for training and growth. My initial answer, and this is where, if she were asking me this in person without me being on camera, I would smile and I would joke with her and I'd give her a hard time. I'd be like, you shouldn't be in pain when you're training. Now, it doesn't mean things feel good. There's a big difference between the two. But pain, you want to think about is and I use this, it's more of a facial expression I use with people, as weird as this sounds. But almost everybody who I work with on the side of the rehab, the second I give them this response to answer that question, because I get asked it all the time, is they go, I know exactly what you mean. It's if you're doing something and you're going, I don't know, that's probably not the right option. If you're doing something and you said, yeah, that hurt, all right, let's go, that's probably an okay option. It's a general statement. Try not to take that super literally, but we've all had little things go on when we train and we're doing it. We're going, I don't know. I don't really like how that feels, and not in the sense of I don't like because it's hard. I don't like because it burns. There's a different thought that comes into our subconscious. It's like an unsure thought. Those are usually the things you want to consider. Does it mean you can't do what you're doing? No, but it usually does mean there might be something underlying that's worth paying attention to. Might be. And so to specifically answer the question as easy as possible now, it's I make the face. If you're doing it in something and you go, I don't know about that, probably something you want to consider trying to work around. If you're training and you're going, that was hard, that sucked, that hurt like heck, but yeah, let's go, you're probably good with that. Again, everybody falls in, if everybody falls in a little different area, but you know, that's a general rule of thumb that can get a lot more specific, which I do have a question. We may get to it today, we may not. We'll see where we go, but I'll save all the questions for as we go. All right, what do you got here?
I don't know. He said his Squeak moved it away and had to start.
Oh, Squeak, you're messing everything up, man. Oh, that's my dog's name. Sorry, my dog's name is Squeak. Yeah, he's a 100-pound pit bull, but I named him Squeak. Don't worry about it, guys. It's cool. Let's see what's so in terms of you got it, man. Yep. That's as easy as I could say to break it down. In all honesty, the most, again, quote unquote, I appreciate that, optimal setup is what you can replicate consistently that is achieving your goal. That's it. Because you can't, you're not going to achieve, and here's a life statement for you that I strongly believe in. Without consistency, you can't do much of anything. So if we just put that back to training, the number one variable that has to be set up is consistency before all. You can talk about nutrition, how's my nutrition and my training hard. None of that matters at all if you are not consistent. Nothing matters if you're not consistent. If you have one day of your meal plan that you hit just like you wanted to, I'm sorry, guys. It's great. Congratulations. But it doesn't matter if the other 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, whatever, are no good. Consistency matters, not perfection. Now, don't mix those two up. It's not perfection. It's consistency. In my opinion, perfection is a made-up standard that we have we don't have a measure for it. Perfection has no measure. There's no way to tell what is perfect. And so just ignore the fact that that word really even exists with this kind of stuff, because what is perfect? As soon as you think you've achieved perfect, you're going to find 2 or 3 other things that you could do and add to it. So just ignore the statement about, sorry, I'm going off on a little rant here. Ignore what perfect is. Perfect is irrelevant. Go with consistent, right? And once you're consistent, you can pick up on the little pieces as you go. So got to be consistent. Hands down, number one, that's what matters. You've got to do it with effort. If you don't try, if you're at a job and you show up every day, but you don't try, you're probably still not going to be very good at it. If you go to the gym every day, but you don't try, you're probably not going to reach the goals you want to look for. So I refer to that as intensity. Again, keep in mind, intensity doesn't mean how much noise you make. Intensity is the effort you put out. Consistency, effort, and only then, as stuff falls off my wall, we'll just move this one. Only then are we even starting to think about these finer details, okay? Only then are we going to start to think about these finer details once we have the consistency and the effort. So yeah, you got it there, Jake. All right, so let me look down. So,
have like 10 for 2 questions. Maybe.
oh, 2. Holy cow, the time already. All right, let me see. Let me scan through them and let me pick one. I'll pick a shorter one.
I have one. If you were to try your machine for the first time, what body part would you do first?
Okay. So good one here. So because they probably couldn't hear you. The question was, if you were to try your machine for the first time, what body part would you do first, strongest or weakest? And so the reference there is to machine is I train people with the NeuFit Newbie. It's a specialized electrical stimulation machine. We won't go into all the details of that right now. Outcomes essentially are it helps with better muscle connection, build muscle a little faster, build strength a little faster. We'll set that aside for now. But if I were to use it for the first time, what would I choose? Now, the straightforward answer is it doesn't matter. Whatever you want. If you want what I would do personally, sorry as I hit the mic, what I would do personally. Now, this has to do with who I am as a person, so my personality. When I think of the word strongest and weakest, what goes through my head is which ones do I do the most effective and which ones am I a little less effective at? That's how I think strongest and weakest. I don't necessarily think actual strength of a muscle. I'm not sure how she meant it, but we'll go with what I think here. And so I think of, like, let's say people come to me all the time, and there tends to be two main areas for women. This is not going to surprise anybody. For women, glute training becomes something that's they always come to me about helping improve glute training, and for men, back training. And so when I think of weakest, I think of the pieces that I feel like I'm leaving some on the table. Like I don't have a great connection with. I don't feel like I'm stimulating things the same way as I am other areas. And so what would I do personally? I would do the weakest. The reason I would do the weakest is because the way it works is it helps improve the connection to be able to use a muscle more effectively. Again, without going into all the physiology, we'll just go surface level with it real quick. But it helps improve your effectiveness of training by helping and forcing muscles to contract while you actually go through training. And because of that, we can build the neurologic pathway that allows us to become more effective at training. Now, it's the same thing we do naturally when we practice something. So when we do anything, when we're learning to do anything, the more we practice, the better these types of pathways build. And this type of thing just really accelerates that ability, because theoretically, again, this is theoretically, if I was training, I was working out my back and I just couldn't feel the muscles contract. Well, if I really focused, kept practicing, finding out what worked for me, this kind of things, then eventually I would. The problem is having that background and ability to do it sometimes gets a little bit, we don't know where to go. We think that should develop in an instant, right? All of a sudden we're going to do something and boom, there it is. Got it. It doesn't work that way. And so with the question of strongest or weakest, why I would pick the weakest, the one I connect with the least, is because this machine gives you the immediate feedback of that's where the muscle contracts. And then we go to train with it on, and we work through the eccentric and the concentric piece of it. And we're forcing that mechanism to occur because we're forcing those muscles to produce the output that we're looking for at a higher level. And so straightforward answer, I'd pick the weakest. That's my opinion. But again, there's no perfect right answer.
So, can you make a series of videos for full body mobility work and injury prevention, and or is that your plan with these lives?
So a full body program for mobility and injury prevention. Currently, I will tell you, I don't necessarily have, there's not going to be like, hey, this is a plan. Here you go. It's got all of these things. We didn't touch on mobility very much, but there's actually a big story behind how I view mobility. I'll hit it really quickly. I'll give you guys a little teaser of it here in a second. But going into those things for different parts of the body, as far as any part we want, absolutely, that's planned. That'll be on some of these things. I'll have posts that follow up with it, that kind of stuff. Just don't look for like a handout that says, hey, here you go. And I don't know, maybe in the future, but that's not in the books right now. Just to give you, Vanessa said it will be. Okay, we'll see. Let's super quick though. I'll leave you guys with this, and I'll make sure I talk about this more next time because I got that question and a couple others on mobility. Again, why becomes incredibly important. Okay, so we see a lot of things that are mobility exercises online. When somebody comes to me and says, hey, I feel like I have tight X, or I can't move this, my first thought is why. I always have to think why. I can't just say, oh, okay, you can't move that. Let's give you this one. It's going to make you move. That's not true, because we've got to think about what we call passive and active mobility. Passive mobility has to do with more joint, ligament, that kind of passive structures. Active mobility has to do with muscle and tendon. So it's our ability to actually produce movement actively. That comes in the form of like what we generally refer to as like motor control. So do we actually have access actively to these ranges? Because we can have all the passive mobility we need and not have active mobility. Now, very rarely, if ever, can I think of a time where we wouldn't have passive, but we would have active. That doesn't make very much sense. So you got to have the passive, but you also have to have the active. Those are two very, very different things. Two very different things. So when somebody comes and sits in front of me, the first thing I do is when they say this is I assess their passive mobility to decide if we need anything like that. And typically what that means is I move them without them having to activate any muscles. And I check the mobility of the different joints, because that tells me, is there actually limitation in the joint, ligament, and or any other passive structure? Or is this just their lack of ability to access this motion, which is the active mobility? That's more of the motor control side of it. And depending on which combo or which it is, takes us down a very different path. Because if it's an active issue, then we tend to build out into exercises that are going to start to push us into end ranges, so we can access more of that range. So there's a ton more to that conversation, but I'll probably just leave a teaser there. I actually do. That is something I wanted to get to. We just didn't get time today, which is fine. I appreciate all the questions that were coming in. So if you jump on next week or you watch a follow-up from next week, expect something like that to be on there. I'm going to star that as a high priority. I got tons of other questions, a handful of other questions on there that we didn't get to today, but I'll try and make it a point to get those a little bit more next time I see you guys too.
So what is your plan moving forward in the next couple of weeks?
So as we keep going with this, the plan is just Mondays at the same time, so 10 o'clock Central Time, if you are in a different area. That's what I'm going to set up doing much more of these lives. And again, my goal with these things is to really turn this into a community of people that want to interact with one another, to answer these questions that we all have, because most of us have very similar questions. And oftentimes we get stuck in not knowing where or how to ask these questions. And you'd be amazed that if a good community has many people in it with different backgrounds, and oftentimes these types of questions can be bounced around and you can get lots of information. While I have specific training, schooling, and education in these areas, I learn a lot of stuff from everybody that I talk to. And so doing these things once a week to start here, that's going to be our plan on Mondays at 10. Getting these things rolling. So keep sending in your questions, all that kind of stuff. And we'll start working on building a community. If you're looking for me specifically, so the type of stuff that I do essentially is, obviously I'm a physical therapist by profession. So injury rehab, injury prevention type of stuff. And use the word injury lightly. If you're just not as good at something as you'd like to be, or you have a little something going on, then that may be kind of what we're talking about here. Body work, so recovery stuff outside of like an injury, but if we just need to get some tissue mobility, some recovery work, things like that. All stuff that I do. What's that?
Lymphatic.
Oh, Vanessa mentioned lymphatic. So yeah, that's a favorite, especially of competitors come close to a show, because it's pretty fascinating what the body does sometimes as you work on some different lymphatic drainage techniques and techniques around that, which isn't only competitors, but also comes from if you've had specific surgeries or you have issues with it. Usually the people that are having issues with the lymphatic type of stuff, you probably are very well aware of what I'm talking about already. But that, and then training. So training on the newbie. So using that electrical stimulation device that I have to help improve the speed of which we build muscle, build strength, improve our movement patterns, all that kind of stuff. As well as just learning the biomechanics of movement as we train. So even if we're training without it, how can we optimize these things to our body? So individually, no global optimization, but these movement patterns to what we have going on to get the most out of us. That's kind of all the big collection of things, but that's the stuff that I specialize in. And so those are the types of things, like the background. If you guys have questions or thoughts or things, those are things you can send in. It's really diverse. So I have a feeling the more you guys hear me talk and ask questions and how I explain stuff, you'll get a really good idea of what it is that we can work together on achieving. because I get asked the question all the time, like, what do I do? And you just heard there's a bunch of stuff. And all of that, sometimes once you hear it, once you hear some information, some explanation, then you kind of go, okay, these are the thoughts that I have on these things. So at the very least, keep joining, keep tuning in, watch live if you can, so you can ask questions. If you can't, watch whenever it goes up, when it's posted. I appreciate all of this. Again, share this stuff around. Anybody you know that you think is interested in any of this stuff, let them know. Have them follow me, jump on the lives, whatever it is. I'm also, if there is more of a rehab background that goes on with some of these things, I'm also very, very much up for going through actual rehab scenarios with people with certain things. It's hard when asked a general question without being able to directly relate to somebody, but it still gives a lot of really good information. So even if that's not your background, a lot of times you can hear things through the process that will answer other questions you might have, because the rehab process, so if we've got an injury, to the effective training process isn't a we do one then we do the other. It's a continuing of building towards it. So there's a lot of crossover and carryover as we go with that. So some of that stuff becomes very, very fascinating, very interesting, and is a blast to really dive into and explain. All right, guys. So I'm gonna jump off here. Again, I appreciate everybody joining. Make sure you share it around. Follow my two pages there. I've got it listed at the top. Those are my two different Instagrams, my specific business one and my personal one. There's a lot of crossover between what I post there. But hope you enjoyed it. I will catch up with you guys next Monday. Be sure I'll post more questions, things, and be sure to hit me with all the questions you have. I appreciate it. Everyone have a good one.
Nice. And then go into stream.
This.
Yeah.